Okay, we are recording now.
Okay. And this is the ad hoc operating procedures meeting of January the 10th, 2024. Our last meeting was on my birthday, so it was on December 20th, 2023, and we finished reviewing the we finished I guess we're reviewing. The committee looked at the reworking of the disciplinary procedures that I did and made a couple of minor changes, and then I was instructed to send them to our outside counsel, and he looked at them and made some very minor changes, which I'll mention in a moment, and then we just need to approve those tonight. For Ivania's information, since she wasn't at the meeting, I guess the last two meetings, we basically took the Dwayne's original draft, and it looks like Dwayne is joining us, and so if you can rename him.
Yes. Hi, Commissioner Harvey.
And there's basically three types of discipline reviews that we can do, or some of them are required to do. One of them is we are required to review all discipline that is imposed by the PD. We can make recommendations if we do so on a timely basis on any case where there is a complaint. And then we also have the ability to make recommendations on cases that are not misconduct related, so they would be performance related. And so we decided it made sense to divide those three duties and authorities into three separate sections, and to quote the relevant sections of the implementation ordinance, and then to add in a couple of procedural things on our own. And then we had a section on confidentiality and a section on the criteria for evaluating discipline, because those are the same across all three types of discipline reviews. And then we included the department's discipline matrix as an appendix. The changes that or the comments that our outside counsel made was that, as we already noted, we are requesting that the department notify us within 10 days when they complete an investigation, and also when they impose discipline, so that we can respond on a timely basis. That is not a deadline that is in the ordinance, but he agrees that if we put it in the procedures and they adopt the procedures, both the city council after meet and confer, then we then it becomes something that they are obligated to do. And a second issue that actually came in directly from Mr. Bennett, and it was a discussion that our chief investigator and I had regarding what happens if a case if the CPP doesn't have a chance to review the case within 1 year. And so, for example, we had some recent cases where we finished our review within the year, but by the time we got the discipline memos, it was already beyond the year. And our instructions were that POBAR doesn't allow us to make any comments on a case after the 1 year. And so I put into if you want to scroll down, where did I put? Well, I don't know what happened here, because I thought that you're looking. You have Mr. Bennett's,
Mm-hmm.
what I was referring to is the one that's dated today that I did, where I already made the changes that he recommended.
Oh, I can pull it up then. Let me just pull that one up. Mm. Mm. And what, could you refer me to the name of the document?
Yeah, it's draft disciplinary review procedures dash
Oh,
revised
yeah.
by D case 11024.
Mhm. Okay.
And then if you look at and then if you scroll down to the end of one, so scroll up, no, I'm sorry, scroll up just a little bit. Just a little bit more. It should be there. There we are. So I added all commission action shall be completed within the 1 year statute of limitations under the POBAR and the code there. And so, and I actually copied the section number from section 2 there. And then section 3 already makes reference to the time limits specified above. And so anyway, so I added that to make it clear that after the 1 year deadline passes, we do not have the ability to make any review. So anyway, any questions on the policy?
Was there a third, was there a second comment that Mr. Bennett wrote? I just don't see that copy anymore, but I pulled it.
And one of them was he suggested we take off the word approval of discipline and just put discipline. And so I did that. So,
Okay.
and then he suggested on, I put as a preference, as a preface to the statement of regarding the 10-day notification that, yeah, so in order to fulfill, well, actually, you're looking at section 2 there, but if you look at section 1,
Mhm.
I have the same language in order to fulfill the duty on a timely basis. On B, he suggested that we add that language in order to fulfill the duty on a timely basis, comma. And so I added that to that. And so all the changes he recommended have been incorporated, plus the one I just mentioned that came about as a result of our discussion of whether we could review cases after the 1 year. And so the committee reviewed this at the last meeting and approved it pending Mr. Bennett's review. And so I think unless there is any objection, that we can go ahead and send it on to the full commission for approval at our next meeting. And so I don't hear any objections, so we will do that. And then our next item is the investigation procedures, which is really the meat and potatoes of what this committee is doing, will be doing. And over the past couple of months, our chief investigator has put a lot of time into putting together the draft procedures. I know that because I get notified every time she makes a change to the document, and she's been putting in a lot of work up into it, including just a few hours ago. And I think I'll just turn it over to her to maybe give us a overview of the document. It's a 19-page document, and we're not going to get through it tonight. We had not planned on getting through it tonight. We figured it would take at least 2 or 3 meetings. And it also will need to be reviewed by our outside counsel, but maybe you can give us an overview and then the committee members, after we get the overview, can spend some time individually reviewing them, and then we can come back next week. Well, not next week, but in 2 weeks with questions or suggestions. So is that okay?
Sorry, 1 second. Yes, of course. I was just switching between screens. I apologize. Yeah, so realistically, I think it was a little less than a few months. I was working on it with everything going on. And actually, I think if we count, it just started like 3 months ago, but it feels like forever. Yeah, definitely was trying to work on it. And I think it's pretty much finalized. So I think I'll pull up first the older version, the one that I took as the base, of which I worked off, the one that was drafted by Mr. Bennett. Let me pull it up. Just to give you a little bit of perspective.
And then what's the name of it?
This is the investigations procedure. So I will be pulling out the document that is called revised draft outline. The last modified date is November 3rd. That's Mr. Bennett's copy.
Okay. Okay, I see it.
Okay. I can't share it. Sorry. Okay. There it is. So this is the original version that Mr. Bennett drafted, and I kind of took it as, you know, the baseline. I removed some of the things that I didn't think would be relevant. Primarily the kind of the first initial parts of it, because they were more related to SDPD and their investigations. And again, just a reminder that we're focusing on drafting our own CPP internal investigations procedure of how we are going to approach investigations once it goes through meet and confer. I did rearrange some of the sections that Mr. Bennett had and also made my own additions. So if you want to, when you're reading the procedure that I drafted on your own time, if you want to compare to what was there before, what are the things that I took out, feel free to refer to this document just so that you can know what was there initially. But I'm going to stop sharing and I will share the one that I drafted. It's the document is called Working Draft Outline, San Diego Commission and Police Practices Investigations, and that's going to be the document that was last modified by me today. So, and that's the one that you should be referring to moving forward.
Well, it's not the outline, it's the procedures, right? Because it was.
Yeah, I can rename it after today's meeting. So Working Draft of San Diego Commission of Police Procedure, Commission of Police Practice Investigation Procedure. So, and then it will always have the most recent date. So it's as of today. The main thing I did is also I separated the procedure in sections so that it's easier to read and comprehend. We have like an introduction, a brief background, similarly to what we had in the discipline review procedure. That kind of, again, reminds the reader why we're drafting this procedure and what are our powers in terms of investigations. The next section is jurisdiction, which outlines clearly what are the complaints that we can investigate. And it's 3 types. So the ones that we are mandated to investigate by the ordinance, and then type 2 incidents and type 3 incidents are the ones that are discretionary investigations. And tried to include some criteria there on how we will determine when and how we will investigate those incidents. Some of the criteria come directly from the ordinance, and some of the criteria come from Mr. Bennett's draft, and some of the criteria I added as well. The third section is complaints by the public. So this section kind of defines of what a complaint is, how we can receive complaints, and why it's necessary for us to investigate, start investigations. The fourth major section is cooperation between the commission, the police department, and the city departments. So there were some sections in Mr. Bennett's draft that I felt are really important. And there are also some passages in the ordinance that kind of set the tone that it is important that the two departments primarily cooperate. So I felt like we need that section in the procedure as well. And then the next larger section is investigation guidelines. So it will be split into subsections. So some general provisions on investigations. It's the bulk of it, and then guidelines related to the type 1 incident investigations, which will primarily have to do with accessing to officer-involved shooting scenes, deaths in custody scenes, and the complications that we have to work around as we work on this procedure is the county-wide memorandum of understanding, which kind of complicates how we need to approach this particular section. And this is why it's not finalized, because this is the one that I still need to discuss with Mr. Bennett and to add my notes on. So just as a refresher that in 2021, I think the county police departments, San Diego Police Department, Sheriff's Department, Chula Vista Police Department, and some other, they all entered into their own memorandum of understanding that stipulates that basically once a shooting occurs, an officer-involved shooting occurs, or deaths in custody occurs, let's take SDPD as an example, with SDPD officers involved, then another agency will come and do a criminal investigation. So with SDPD, it's actually going to be Sheriff's Department who will do the investigation. And if SDPD and the Sheriff's Department are involved in the shooting or in the incident that resulted in civilian death, then the Chula Vista Police Department is going to come in and do its criminal investigation. So what it means for us is who has the authority over the crime scene and who we need to work with in order to get access to the crime scene. So that's why this memorandum of understanding kind of complicates our approach to this. And we can definitely talk more, once we get to that section, but I just wanted to flag it for you. And I can also share the actual memorandum of understanding so you can all review it after today's meeting. It's pretty short. It's about 4 pages.
Can you put that
And
into the shared drive?
Yeah, I can put it in the shared drive, yes. And I can also, what can be relevant for this particular section, I'm just going to make a note for myself, is IA's manual that mentions officer-involved shootings. I can share that as well and put what pages to pay attention to. SDPD homicide manual also has to do with shooting scenes and specifically the MOU. So I can identify those pages for you as well. And the Sheriff's Department policies and procedures on shootings scenes. I can also share all of that so you can review those so we can have an informed discussion once we get to that section, because I think this is the most tricky one. So, and you can see that it kind of has lots of my notes because this is the one that I still need to finalize. Oh, and the last piece on this, the cherry on top, there is also a California Department of Justice that we have to account for as we drafting this piece, because according to that countywide memorandum of understanding, some incidents that resulted in the death of an unarmed civilian specifically will be investigated by the California Department of Justice, the criminal investigation. So this is yet another agency that we need to account for either here or, once we do these investigations on practice. So, yeah.
Sorry, you said when an unharmed civilian.
Unarmed.
Oh, unarmed, sorry.
Unarmed.
Unarmed civilian is like, can you explain that part one more time just for me? Because I think I
Yes.
heard wrong.
So specifically when it is determined that the person who died from officer-involved shooting was unarmed, that investigation will go to the California Department of Justice, and it's going to be explained in the MOU once you see
Okay.
it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I
Yeah.
heard that one wrong.
Unharmed, yeah,
Thank
that
you.
doesn't make sense. Okay. Any questions so far? I also want to pause, because sometimes I can go fast, so please feel free to stop me or ask questions. Okay. So the third section of the general investigation guidelines is specifically on interviews, which is going to cover civilian interviews and officer interviews. And then the sixth major section is on investigations findings. So what do we do once investigators complete their investigation, and what the commission can do once they review the case that's presented to them by the investigator, and what the police department has to do once they get the finding. Notification to parties, that's also important, because under the ordinance, we have some obligations on how we can notify parties and how we should notify and who we should notify, but some of the things it's up to us. And the last section is commission investigative hearings. So full disclosure, this is just what I copied and pasted what Mr. Bennett had in his draft, and we can discuss as a committee, or you can discuss as a committee once we get to it, whether this section is necessary. Because I think the ordinance very, very briefly mentions hearings. So I think the first question would be whether we want this here at all. And as you go through this entire procedure, there will be some notes in my comments that I will leave on purpose for you as my questions. So that once you read, you think about them, and we can all discuss them as a team during the meetings when we start going through this procedure, because some of these issues are not something that a decision that I can make on my own. I wrote something, but it would be up to the committee for, to decide whether this is the approach they want to go with.
Yeah. And with regard to the hearings, content that Mr. Bennett included, most of it came directly from the CLRB procedures. And so CLRB has a investigative hearings process. For some complicated reasons, they haven't used it, but I think it's actually a good process. And when we get to it, we can talk about whether we need it. I think it's good to include in there as an option. And I think it's best to do it now rather than, some point in the future trying to add it.
Yes, of course. And I think that's important discussion once we get to that.
Yeah.
And something that I maybe should have mentioned before I even went to this draft is just, I wanted to share with you some of the things that I did when I was drafting it. In addition to kind of working off Mr. Bennett's draft, I was doing a lot of research on finding the documents that are relevant for us. So finding the actual MOU, reading SDPD procedures, IA procedures, homicide procedures, DOJ procedures on the investigations, POBAR, delving into our ordinance, just generally kind of doing, general research. I was also referring to New York City's, some of their rules, which are publicly available. That's for my previous job to also rely on. And I met with Paul Parker, the executive officer from CLRB, to rely and to get some insight on how CLRB is handling access to officer-involved shootings and deaths in custody. I also attended training today with them on, some deaths-related information. And I met with Mr. Bennett once. I consulted with Doug, and I'm also meeting with Mr. Bennett on Friday to finalize some of the questions that I have. And then the last piece. So I just wanted to share kind of, what sort of work went into my research when I was preparing this. And the last piece will be 2 appendices with proposed scripts for civilian interviews. So when I say civilian, that's the term that I brought in from New York. We can, use a different term if you don't like, if you don't like it, if you want to come up with a different term, but civilians is an umbrella term used for complainants, witnesses, so basically not officers. So proposed script for their interviews and a proposed script for officer interviews. So there is no necessity to have a civilian script for an interview, but I think it's important, and that's something that we had in New York City. But there has to be an admonition by law that has to be given to an officer. And that kind of worked off what Mr. Bennett had. This is something that I need to finalize as well, because this is his piece, which is more situational. Like if an officer refuses to answer, we'll give him an admonition, but my proposal is to have a blanket admonition or a script in the beginning of every officer interview. So we do that admonition right away, similar to what IA does, similar to what New York City does. So we don't even have to get to the point of doing an admonition later, but this won't apply to once we think that an officer may be criminally implicated, then we have to do a separate Miranda warning. So there are some court cases cited here, so I would also recommend going into them to just get an idea of where these admonitions are coming from. Any questions or anything, Doug, you think that I should add?
No, I think you've done an excellent job, and I read through them and I found them very logical and easy to read through. And so they're much more in the format of a operating procedure than Mr. Bennett, kind of similar to how we did with discipline. His was kind of a memorandum of law. This is putting it into the form of procedures. And I think you included everything that we had put into our initial outline, and you've done it in a very organized fashion. My only suggestion, this is a very minor thing, but I think it'd be helpful, would be to add a table of contents at the beginning, since it is kind of a long document that lists the sections, maybe in the subsections and what page they are, so that we can easily refer to it.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you for the feedback. Since you mentioned the outline, I would also want to mention that for the rest of the committee. In the folder with our documents where we're working from, there is a document called Outline of Investigation Standard Operating Procedure that Commissioner Case shared with me earlier, which I think was right, the CRD had.
Yeah, it's the Transition Planning Committee of the interim CPP put that together, and I think Mr. Bennett used it as well as.
So you can also go to that document and just kind of see, what are some of the pieces that the transition committee wanted to see, so you can check the procedure yourself against it. But also caveat that there will be some things that, in my opinion, should not go in the investigations procedure. And I just wanted to kind of share with everybody the way that I suggest approaching it, as this is a large, we have to draft it because of the ordinance, right? It has to exist, but it also shouldn't be really granular to the point of how we conduct our investigations. So my view on this is that there has to be a general procedure, but also the commission should have the ability to draft their own internal investigations manual on more detailed how to review police documents, how to do draft closing reports, how to review, how to do interviews, etc., which will be more detailed, which shouldn't necessarily be shouldn't have the need to go through meet and confer, because we do have the right for our internal documents. So just if you could read this procedure with an understanding that there will be a separate investigations manual pertaining to the investigators and training materials that will guide, the actual investigation process. And for that, I also will rely on my expertise from New York City and my former executive director from New York City graciously shared the redacted investigations manual from the CCRB that I can use to draft the internal investigations procedure. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, and a key thing there is that the operating procedures should specify those things that relate to the relationship between the department and the CPP, as opposed to our internal document. And the procedures manual is something that can be modified internally and doesn't have to go through meet and confer in city council. And so the document that the operating procedure is kind of a global document that defines how we work with the police department and the other agencies, but as was mentioned, the operations manager will get into the detail of how the investigators, once we hire them, go about doing their jobs. If that makes sense to everybody? Anybody have any questions about that?
I just wanted to say, Olga, that looks great. Thank you very much for all the work that went into that. Like, it's very easy to read, go through and understand like what we're talking about. Because like that's our priority, like making sure that it's not too like the words that are being used are like large and bureaucratic and hard to understand, because we want to make sure that it's very transparent and that the community can understand, just like us commissioners. So thank you very much, like the work that went into it and the research behind the scenes, like it looks really well. Thank you, Olga.
Thank you.
Yeah, what-
Appreciate the feedback.
There was one word I had to look up in the dictionary though, and I forget what it was. It starts with the V.
That could have been Mr. Bennett's words though, so keep that in
Okay,
mind.
that's possible too.
I think I know which one you're referring to. Yeah, I had to look that up too.
So, but
Taking them side by side was really helpful to understanding what we had prior to. So like the one that was revised by Mr. Dwayne Bennett, and then the one that we have now, it was very helpful to put them side by side.
so
Thank you.
Uh,
Go ahead.
yeah, I guess, my suggestion is to give everybody an opportunity to read through it in its entirety and digest it. I did that with a little bit earlier draft, and I'll do it again with the new draft. And then if everybody can take the time to do that and come with your questions. If we have questions or suggestions, can we put them on the document itself? Or do you want this, how would you prefer that we do that if we have a suggestion?
I mean, I'll leave it up to you all. Doug, you drafted things before. I don't know what's better. Like we all put in notes in the same document, because I also don't want it to look crowded. So
Yes, I'm thinking maybe like a little bit crowded.
I mean, I'm completely comfortable with writing them all the comments like on this one, if that's okay. Because even if it looks crowded, I think it's easier to see what specific area we're talking about, and keeping track, making sure that the thoughts aren't elsewhere and that we're keeping track of it.
Okay. And
I'll look
so,
into that.
so does everybody know how to do the tracking on a Google Doc?
I'm gonna show it to everybody.
And
So.
if anything, like not necessarily making edits where it changes the color, like of what you're typing, but just making comments on the side how
yeah.
Olga did. And then because you could just reply to the same comment that Olga made. So that would be very helpful.
Yeah, and that can make the document less crowded. But just so you know, if you want to edit things in the text, you can go to this top right corner. There is this pencil or pen editing mode, and just select suggesting. I just want to underscore that suggesting is important, because if you go to editing, it's gonna remove the text and we won't see the original text. We will only see what you edited. So we want to make sure that the edits are reflected as a new color, right? So over the text. And then like Commissioner Rubio suggested, it may be easier if you just highlight the piece and then click on the plus, and you can add a comment and people can reply, and this will make it less crowded.
And then what day would be good to have our thoughts collected and comments ready for discussion?
Well, I think as long as we have it done prior to our next meeting, which will be in 2 weeks. And I don't know when, do you recall when Commissioner Honore gets back in?
I think he gets back in this week, if not early next week.
Okay, and then, so he should have time to do it, and he's pretty good about looking at things and critiquing them, so.
So following today's meeting, I can send my brief notes, the next steps. I can send links to these documents for you all, just so that you can easily access them. And some of the documents that I referred earlier, like the MOU, some SDPD procedures with pages that would be helpful for you to read as well as you're reading through this procedure. And this way, Commissioner Honore is in the loop as well on what we discussed and what to do for the next meeting. And just flagging that this probably will be a harder procedure to go through than the discipline. It will have some of the terms and, you know, some of like the processes that may not necessarily make sense. So please definitely feel free to ask questions and clarifications as we go through this.
And I think at some point we may want to invite Mr. Bennett to a committee meeting, especially if we have questions about different sections. But I'd
Sure.
rather wait until we get things kind of fleshed out so that we're clear as to what issues we want his guidance on.
Sounds good.
Commissioner Aziz or Commissioner Harvey, do you have any thoughts or comments?
No, I do not. As I read, I can just make the comments on the Google Doc. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't have anything. Everything's good.
Okay. And so do you have anything, Commissioner Rubio? Otherwise, I think we can go ahead and adjourn and plan on meeting again in 2 weeks at the same time. Same time, same place.
No comments on my end either. And it looks like we're adjourning before the 7 mark. So that's always a good.
So, and I just want to thank our chief investigator, Golub, one more time. She has done an outstanding job on this, and I want her to know that her work is acknowledged and appreciated.
Thank you. Well, let's go through this first because we don't know. But thank you.
Okay, then I guess we're adjourned.
All right.
Thank
have
you,
a good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
All right.